Hello, my darling cherubs. Today we're going to talk about the next step. Now that we've been working a little bit on comparing and contrasting, just the general idea of finding similarities and differences between things, now we're going to talk specifically about comparing two texts. And when I use the word text here, know that I don't just mean written text. A text could also be something like a play or a movie or a documentary, something like that. So the word text here is a fluid word, we'll say. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about the process for comparing two texts. And to show you, we're going to use our old standby story, Raymond's Run, which you should all still be familiar with, the story about Squeaky and her taking care of her older brother. And we're going to compare this text to another text that is similar enough for comparison, but not the same. So when you're thinking about what two texts to compare, you're going to think about the short story that you've been working with for your last couple literary essays. So let's say, for example, that you've been working with the story Slower Than the Rest by Cynthia Ryland. That might be your first text, and you're going to think of a text to compare to that. And the one thing you want to make sure that the texts have in common is that they have a similar topic, because that way they have enough going for them that's similar that you have something to compare. You wouldn't, for example, want to compare two texts that had zero in common with each other. So if we're working with Raymond's Run is about a girl who has a handicapped sibling. So I found a text that has a similar topic. It's about a person with a handicapped sibling, but it's not the same as Raymond's Run by any means. So I'm going to show you that text now. This is Raymond's Run. The other text we have is a poem. So we have, first of all, this is a short story, Raymond's Run. Now we're going to look at a poem, and it's called Disabled Brother by Bridget Zimmer. So I'm going to read it to you real quick. It says, "Dearest brother, you have been labeled. You cannot talk or take care of yourself. Some would say you are incapable, but I know different. From the outside looking in, you aren't all there. Your mouth does not form the words you think. They believe you aren't smart because of the words you don't share. But I know different. People think you are weak and helpless. They think you are dumb, and they judge from afar. They think you are alone and friendless. But I know different. You are beyond lovely because you are innocent. You know no stranger, and the world is beautiful in your eyes. You love with no end, and yes, you are different. But that is why I love you." So, nice little poem there. It makes me a little teary. So, we're going to compare these two texts, and to make your life a little bit easier, I created a comparing organizer for you here. And so what I started off by doing is coming up with some things that you might compare when it comes to two texts. So the first thing I want us to think about when we're comparing is the genre. And remember, genre is just what type of text is it? Is it a play? Is it a short story? Is it a documentary? Is it a poem? Is it a piece of nonfiction? So our first text, we're going to enter the text names here. So we'll use Raymond's Run as our short story. We'll put it in quotes, Raymond's Run by Toni Cade Umbara. And then we have over here text 2, Disabled Brother by Bridget, I already forgot her name, Zimmerman? Bridget Zimmer. Okay, so now I've entered the names of our two texts. Now let's think about the genre of each. So for text 1, Raymond's Run, the genre is a short story. And you might even write a fictional short story. And then over here, text 2, Disabled Brother, we're going to say is a poem. So already we see there's something different between these two texts. One is a short story, one is a poem. Theme is the next thing you might compare. So a life lesson you learn from the text. And as we've talked about, there's more than one life lesson in most texts. So if I think about Raymond's Run, some of the lessons I can think of off the top of my head, let's see. Family is more important than anything. You could argue that. Squeaky might say that. You could argue sometimes there are things more important than winning. I think at the end of the story, Squeaky learns that lesson. We could say, give people a chance. There might be more to them than you first think. And that I'm thinking about Squeaky and Gretchen and their friendship. So those are a couple of themes I might think of for the short story. Now, are any of these themes, I'm going to think to myself right now, are any of these themes present in the poem? Family is more important than anything? Could we argue that that's a theme of the poem? I think we could. So I'm going to take this theme and I'm going to paste it over here. How about sometimes there are things more important than winning? I don't know if that's really something that the poem really teaches us. So I would say that one I probably would not put in this right-hand column. Give people a chance. There might be more to them than you first think. I definitely think that that's one here because the writer of the poem is kind of arguing that people don't see her brother for who he really is. So we could put that one too. Now I want to think, are there any other themes in the poem that are particularly prominent? So if I look back at the poem, um, it sounds like she really is talking a lot about how we don't want to be deceived by appearance, or even also that like sometimes our differences are what make us most lovable. That's a good theme. So I'm going to add that. Sometimes our differences are what make us most lovable. All right, so now I've got some themes, some that are common to both texts, some that are specific to one or the other. Then I'm going to think about structure. Now, if I think about the poem has kind of a cool structure because if you notice, there are a couple of phrases at the end of each stanza that are repeated. But I know different, but I know different, but I know different. And then the last one, but that is why I love you. So I also noticed that this poem is written in 4 sections or stanzas and that it uses this repeated phrase. So under structure for the poem, I'm going to write written in 4 stanzas. And I think each stanza is 4 lines, right? Each stanza, yeah, 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. And I'm going to say uses repeated last line in each stanza for emphasis. Now, the short story structure is a little bit different, and I want to think about some of the main moments in the story. So it starts off with description of Squeaky and her passion for running, and also her care for Raymond. So I guess it's more of description of Squeaky and Raymond's connection, and talk about, and let's see, and discussion of Squeaky's speed. Then we have girl drama, where Squeaky has that interaction with Gretchen. And then we have the race day. And then we have, I'm going to call it the realization, where Squeaky realizes that maybe winning isn't as important as other things. So that's kind of the structure here. So then we're going to come down here to the word tone. And tone isn't something we've talked about as much as I would have liked at this point, and unfortunately it's, something I would be able to talk to you about more easily if we were together. But tone basically has to do with the emotion of the speaker in the story. So when your parents say something to you like, don't you use that tone with me, that usually means that something about the way that you're saying what you're saying is not going over well. So if you say, Mom, I'm not doing my homework, and your mom says, don't you use that tone with me, Ryan, that sort of means that Ryan's mom doesn't like the way Ryan is saying what he's saying. So the tone is basically the way you're saying what you're saying, the emotion that's in it. So if we go to Squeaky and we think about the tone of the story Raymond's Run, I would say one word that I definitely would use for the tone is kind of like defensive, because Squeaky's always kind of trying to say like why everybody else is wrong and she's right. So defensive and maybe even a little bit arrogant. She's got that I'm fastest thing north of Broad Street or whatever she says. So when we come over to the poem, how would you describe the poem here? Would you say that it has a similar tone? I think in a way you could maybe argue that because it sounds like this writer is a little bit defensive of her brother, but it's not quite the same as Squeaky. Squeaky's kind of like defensive, but she also, I might use the word combative, meaning she's like ready to fight you if you disagree with her. So let's say defensive, arrogant, combative. And then the tone for the poem we could say is defensive, but I also sort of detect a certain level of like lovingness in this poem that is more present. So she says, I know different. I know different. That is why I love you. So this poem feels a little bit more emotional to me, a little bit more sentimental. So maybe we'll write loving. Maybe we'll even write sentimental. Now, if you're struggling to come up with tone words, I put a link in here for you, and it gives you basically a list of common words used for mood and tone, and there's lots of them. So you'll see over here are mood words, over here are tone words, and it gives you a list of positive and negative. Now, you're not just going to be like, oh, it's positive. I'll pick anything on this list. These words don't all mean the same things, but they're all something relatively positive. So maybe the poem is nostalgic, meaning that the tone of the author is kind of like remembering fondly the days of before. Or maybe the poem is comforting. Maybe it's confident. So usually this list will have you something that you can use, but there might be more than one that work too. So we've got some tone words for both works. Then we're going to think about the narrative point of view. Whose perspective is the story told from? So we're going to say perspective of a young girl, Squeaky, for most of the story. And her point of view, I think the only person whose thoughts we get are Squeaky's. So we would call that, and she's telling the story from her perspective, so it'd be first person. And then the story of the poem, if we look at, I see she's saying, but I know different, but I know different. They think you are alone in friendliness. So she's talking kind of to her brother, but mostly she's the one telling the story. So again, that would be first person. And it's also, I think, the perspective of a young girl. I'm assuming it's a young girl. We might need to do some research on that, but we'll say young girl, first person. So there's a similarity there. And then another quality I put down here is authorship. So this basically means who wrote it. What do we know about the person who wrote it? So Toni K. Bambara, you might need to do a little research because I don't honestly know too much about her. So quickly look, Toni K. Bambara, who is she? So look her up. Originally named Miltona Merkin-Cade, civil rights activist, writer, teacher, filmmaker. Okay, that's cool. So, oh, look at that. She lived in Harlem, was born in Harlem, but then died in Philadelphia in 1995. So we'll say an African American female author and civil rights activist. And then over here, Bridget Zimmer. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find much biographical information about her because the poem, the site where I found her was not not I don't know that she's like necessarily famous. Okay, so maybe authorship is something we don't worry about, but it's good to check and see. I do know that it's a female, but otherwise I don't know too much. Um, I could put young and maybe do some more research later. Now down here I left a couple more blank lines. You're welcome to add more if you'd like, and this is just for other things you might want to compare between the two texts, and that's up to you if there are some other things you can think of. So your job is basically to choose your two texts and then to fill out an organizer just like this, where you compare these different items: genre, theme, structure, tone, narrative point of view, maybe authorship, and then a couple of others that you come up with. So that's your assignment for today. I hope it makes sense. If you have any questions, just come to office hours and I'll help you. And I'm excited to see you grow your compare and contrast skills. I think you're going to do well with this. All right. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.